I'm on an Avatar hot take kick. Zuko often gets accolades for being one of the best written characters in all of television, but the older I get, the more affected, inspired, and entertained I am by Katara. So I'm just gonna lay down my hot take up front. Katara is the best character in the show, and anyone who finds her mean or shrill or hysterical probably just has unresolved issues with brown women, and maybe women in general. Forgive me if this sounds overly confrontational, but for almost 2 decades now, this fictional teenage girl has received so much hate for the exact reasons that I find her so lovable. Her depth of feeling, her frank observations of the world around her, her relentlessly positive framing of the world. There are so many just effusively cruel Katara haters littered around the internet. People who think she's overly emotional, mean, hysterical, any list of adjectives that's applied to just about any leading female character. And I just don't think you're really a fan of Avatar if you hate the thematic and emotional linchpin of the show. Katara brings us into the story, introducing the war through her lens. She is the quintessence of Avatar. The many implications of the war on normal people are reflected in her goals and backstory. Her tireless effort to not just survive her trauma and pain, but to derive inspiration from it. She is the embodiment of compassion and trust, and is the truest expression of children's media's fixation on friendship. Her martial arts are also visually engrossing, and she's just freaking hilarious.
The stars sure are beautiful tonight. Too bad you can't see them, Toph. I'm Kwame, and this is...
It's what she deserves.
dung. A giant-eared cretin! Look at those things! Do herds of animals use them for shade?
But it must be said that Katara's story is not perfectly integrated into the larger series. While it certainly looks like it's going to be, her story in the end is rendered exterior to the thematic aims of the piece. And if you've seen my last video about Aang's internal struggle, you may see where I'm going with this. Please don't click off the video. The big damn kiss at the end of Avatar is not just bad for Aang's arc, it also takes a big steaming dump on one of the best characters ever drawn. There is a tag on Tumblr called anti-bryke. Bryke is an amalgamated name between Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, the two creators of Avatar, and so we just jam them together and we make Bryke. It's not a ship name, but it should be. Katara is a particular subject of interest within the anti-bryke community. Generally, posters in this tag critique how the show chooses to frame and discuss issues, usually from an intersectional feminist viewpoint, which almost always comes down to how Katara is treated by the text. One tag that commonly intersects with anti-bryke posts are Po-Katara posts. Po/Katara, the panda from Kung Fu Panda. Hot. A panda lily, a rare panda lily. Hashtag pro-Katara commonly overlaps with anti-bryke posts. For some reason, these posts don't really focus on Toph that much. I guess I'm not the only person who assumed that Toph is not a binary girl.
I sound like a guy. A really buff guy.
Well, Toph, what you hear up there is the truth. It hurts, doesn't it?
Are you kidding me? I wouldn't have cast it any other way.
I should say, I don't agree with the severity of a lot of these posts, but goddamn, they are cathartic to read. What I love about these posts is that they sometimes almost seamlessly fit in with the text itself. That's not to say that the criticisms aren't warranted, they're usually spot on. But what I mean is, when watching the show in 2024, we'd probably assume that Bryke agreed with these criticisms too. Like, one common point of discussion is the episode The Southern Raiders, during which Katara comes across as the darkest version of herself. Unlike the rest of the show, where Katara protects the feelings of others, nurtures her friends, and keeps her outlook optimistic and productive, here she is angsty, assertive, and a bit mean. It seems at first like the show is going to punish her for wanting revenge, and taking Appa without permission, and telling Sokka he didn't love their mother as much as she did. Aang's and Sokka's objections to her behavior, and their insistence on forgiveness, and the condescending and entitled tone with which they tell Katara, The ultimate bearer of the gang's emotional labor to suck it up and move on are treated as noble and good and righteous. I'm sorry. Clearly, I'm still mad at them. But in the end, the episode isn't about punishing Katara for pursuing her needs. She is given a position of moral authority in the end, where she passes judgment on Zuko and fully accepts him as a friend and a redeemed person. She conclusively tells Aang that he was wrong and she regrets nothing. She offers no apologies and she ends up happier for it. And she effectively gets the last word in the episode when Zuko confronts Aang with his own capacity for violence. Katara is never even prompted to reflect upon the deeply cutting response she makes to Sokka at the top of the episode. Hurtful though it may be, the show seems to allow for the fact that Katara doesn't need to apologize. In some way, this line reflects a truth that Katara really needs to vocalize. By the way, I really don't think that Sokka is blameless in this interaction. He doesn't just say, "she was my mother too," because it's a thought that sprang into his head apropos of nothing. He says it to silence and insult Katara, to get her to back down. But Katara just kind of states the obvious. And you know what? If Sokka gets to have a special relationship with their father...
Someone has to stay here with the Earth King and help him plan for the invasion. I guess that's me.
No, Sokka. I know how badly you want to help Dad. You go to Chameleon Bay. I'll stay here with the king.
You are the nicest sister ever!
Then it should be evident and completely fair that Katara has a special relationship with their mother. I mean, they were two women living in a deeply patriarchal society, and Kaya's death kind of signals the end of Katara's childhood. Yeah, it's possible that Kaya's death affected Katara more than Sokka, and trying to draw up some equivalence between what Sokka and Katara are going through and just saying that as though that should be enough to get Katara to do whatever you want, like, it's a little messed up, Sokka. Maybe you can't prescribe what their healing process should look like. I don't feel like Katara is being mean in this interaction. She's correctly observing the differences in the three different characters' kinds of grief and advocating for her needs with passion, and refusing to back down when men try to insult her. You know? Maybe that's okay. A similar thing happens with the two forced kisses that Aang does to Katara before the last episode. A worse show might try to hint that Katara is into being kissed by Aang, but in the first instance, she seems bemused and embarrassed, and in the second, she rightfully yells at him and storms away. So, someone behind the scenes of Avatar seems to have realized that Katara is battling sexism throughout the entire run of the show, mostly from her friends and allies. You'd think that the showrunners would, I don't know, try to give that some kind of resolution, show her overcoming the obstacle of constantly being stereotyped and put into a role with radical authenticity and self-knowledge. Maybe. But no. All this poignant and intelligent writing does is make it so much more frustrating and vexing and stunning in the very end of the show, when Katara is written into a relationship with the one main character in the series who hasn't learned a damn thing about who she is. Seriously, both Toph and Sokka have moments where they express deep affection and appreciation for who she is beyond her capacity as a parental surrogate.
I'm coming too.
I thought you didn't want to help.
You need me, and I will never turn my back on you.
Zuko absolutely shines in the Southern Raiders, seeking her out to get yelled at, actually listening to what she says, thinking about what it means, and offering to bring her to Yan Ra and back her up. No conditions, no speeches, just a willingness to understand and be supportive. Aang, on the other hand, has completely broken down under the weight of Katara's full character. The two have never been more at odds than when Katara has been at her most authentic and uninhibited and vulnerable. So how is this relationship a good ending for Katara? At this point, there's just no use hiding it. I have a very personal relationship with what I see as a profoundly bleak ending for a character I really love and resonate with. Romance isn't everything, and sometimes romance isn't even anything. And who you date when you're 14 won't necessarily affect the quality of the rest of your life. But marrying your first boyfriend and that marriage defining your political engagement for the rest of your life, severing your ties with the activism and politics that you were so passionate about as a teenager, that kind of is everything. Katara is not said to have had any presence in the political history of Republic City or any other part of the world after the main series. According to her daughter, Aang's death left her broken and isolated, and her own children and the world around her is far more concerned with her partner's heritage being preserved than her own. She was also the last bender of the Southern Water Tribe. What about her culture? Doesn't that need to be preserved? Katara's life didn't go the way I wanted it to, and that's so unfair. Sometimes I wonder if DiMartino and Konietzko knew just how painfully real Katara is, how engaging and empowering and nuanced she is, the way her story just sucks you in a very visceral way, and how betrayed I felt when her story was undone like that. And I'm not just saying that as a person who knows that Zutara would have objectively made for a better ending. And by objectively, I mean subjectively, as in rooted in the subject, being me, who has observed and processed the art correctly. From Kant to Sontag, we all agree that subjective doesn't mean that every interpretation is grounded or reflects taste as equal in quality to anyone else's. Some readings are better than others, and a proper reading of this text points to the ending being all wrong. But I feel this need to explain the effect that this writing decision has had on me, because they're so much bigger and darker and more fatalistic than just a ship sinking at the last minute. They're systemic. This ending hurts in a way that, frankly, a lot of cis men don't seem capable of understanding. In my last video, I went off on a little tangent about a video made by Sneezy Reviews. In it, the essayist demonstrates as conclusively as possible that Zutara would have made for the most aesthetically correct iteration of this story. And they also have a really fantastic video about Katara and the Southern Raiders, which also really influenced this video. And since I watched these two videos, I've not been able to get the topic off my mind, which is why I've made 3 Avatar videos in a stretch. Sneezy's video concludes with a statement on the visceral and long-lasting wrongness of Avatar's ending, which is the appropriate reaction to a piece of art not becoming the thing it was supposed to be. But my feeling is perhaps less appropriate. I'm angry. Not as just some viewer with no past or inductive relationship to the story, but as someone who is, in a very rigid, unfair, and oppressive sense, a woman. I'm not a woman, and I just want to warn you up front that I'm about to go on a rant that might read to some people as sort of gender essentialist. I'm hoping that you can give me some grace on this one, because the tentacles of patriarchy weave their influence into every moment I spend interacting with society, and they have relentlessly categorized me as a woman, even though I'm not one. And I would be very obviously lying if I said that these oppressive influences have not aligned me with womanhood, as much in solidarity as in empathy. So please forgive the slight inaccuracy, but within the narrow limits of this video, I am a woman, and I'm hurt by what I see as something wrong having been done to Katara, as well as to me, and all the other girls that watched the ending unfold the way it did. The big damn kiss at the end of Avatar between Katara and Aang really never fails to make me a bit ill. In my viewings of the show, the finale ends with Toph making the whole gang laugh. Power of friendship, the end. I'm not saying that Katara doesn't love Aang, but let's be real here, a large part of her immediate feelings of care and love for him have to do with the fact that he represents a possible eventual ending of the war that has more or less destroyed the early part of her life. Let's go through Katara's story, because it's one of the best written arcs in the entire show. Katara spends the first few moments of the show insecure about her use of bending to catch a fish, but still doing her best to provide for her family. After Sokka says something sexist, she becomes really mad because, yeah, shut up, Sokka. Katara is clearly the homemaker, seems like she might also be the breadwinner, and the one thing she's proud of is constantly being ridiculed by her brother. She blows up at him and explains her situation very clearly. Being forced to be a parent at a very young age, particularly because of her gender and the culture she comes from, as well as the tragic death of her mother and the subsequent abandonment of her father, has left her feeling trapped, stifled, and uncared for. Then Aang comes along, and while he's falling in love at first sight, Katara is inspired by the fact that the Avatar is alive. Therefore the war might end soon, therefore her father might come home, and then she won't have to be a parent anymore. Not that she has any conscious desire to be a kid again, she already seems to think her childhood is gone. But over the first season, she pretty explicitly cares for Aang, coddles him, helps him keep his spirits up and his temper under control, because mothering Aang is how Katara initially thinks she can participate in ending the war.
Aang is the Avatar. He's the world's only chance. You both found him for a reason. Now your destinies are intertwined with his.
Since she was 8 years old, she's been a caretaker. This is just a form of that role that actually has an endgame, and isn't a life sentence like it has been. She sees watching over Aang and getting to the North Pole as an expression of her desire for peace.
Your mission is to take back your home. Ours is to get Aang to the North Pole.
It's her form of activism. This starts to shift when she fights her way to the North Pole and realizes that she loves martial arts. She doesn't just have to be the requisite healer for the group, she can fight. In Imprisoned, which is probably the best episode of Season 1, Katara's determination and bravery and cunning all pull her into the spotlight. Her good qualities are praised, rather than being expected as they are in her role as a nurturer. She can be on the front line, she can demand recognition, fight for a cause. She can demand care, in the form of learning from Pakku. Her journey throughout Season 2 sees her continuing to develop as a warrior and a political agent, all while continuing to be the heart of the group. Something we learn about Katara throughout the first 2 seasons is that she is a deeply optimistic person. She trusts people and is quick to form connections. She assumes the best in them. And one way she connects is through empathy, through the festering wound where the memory of her mother lives. This development comes to a head when she has her first real conversation with Zuko. For the first time, we see her initiate a hostile interaction. She begins yelling at him before he even does anything to her or one of her friends. And for the first time, she brings up the death of her mother as an explosion of grief and anger and sadness, rather than as a means of connecting with someone. But she's amazed to find out that it has that effect anyway. She does make a connection. Zuko isn't offended by Katara's rage and pain and aggression. He's capable of being very receptive to her in these states. Maybe connection and compassion don't have to come with being parental and self-sacrificing. Maybe Katara can be her kind self while being authentic and vulnerable. And maybe supporting her side of the war isn't such a cut and dry issue, and she has to follow her own instincts and intellect. Remember that this conversation directly contributes to Zuko turning over to the good guys. Part of the reason Zuko is so anxious about staying in the palace is that he knows Katara was probably able to save Aang because of this conversation. And if that's happened, Zuko is in deep shit. So, Katara's openness and compassion is a very tangible factor in Zuko's switch to the good side. In Season 3, Katara completely comes into her own. The first episode of the season, The Awakening, shows Katara at her most unguarded during a conversation with her father about how lost and hurt she was after he left. The episodes The Puppet Master and The Painted Lady show her at her most competent, confident, and independent, even as they challenge her views and values. Her journey to find her own way to contribute to the world she wants doesn't end at Aang's side. Her final contribution to the war effort actually happens because she forges a really solid friendship with her prior enemy, who then asks for her help. Not as a teacher or a mother surrogate or a healer, but as a person he can trust to handle herself and make wise decisions. Her closeness with Zuko isn't just an extremely moving way to demonstrate how far Katara has come as a person who lives for herself and expresses her truth, but also stands in contrast to just how shallow Aang's feelings for her are. Their very last conversations of the show, from Southern Raiders to Ember Island Players to Sozin's Comet, are of Aang so painfully misunderstanding her that he accuses her of wanting to kill someone, forcibly kisses her when she is very clearly uncomfortable, and then yells at her for raising her voice slightly when he starts behaving like a petulant baby. Of course, Aang is allowed to have his own internal turmoil, but like Katara's, it needs to go somewhere. It can't just be some ridiculous force that changes the story around to meet his desires. And then, in her very last seconds on screen, Katara's puppet strings are yanked on by two middle-aged white guys, and suddenly she isn't the person she had to fight to be anymore, she's this thing that the male hero deserves. It's gross. When I was a teenager, engaging on the internet with people who disagreed with his opinion, I would just get lulled down with this kind of like gross scorn that I just it seems to be like a thing in the Katang community, and I'm sorry if you're a nice Katanger. I'm sure there are nice Katangers, but some of the vocal ones can just be so like mean. And I was like, 13, 14, 15, I'm on the internet and I'm getting like lulled at and like kind of told to back down and be quiet. And I would sit at the computer and seethe at the men and boys who didn't seem to understand the gravity of this writing decision. There's this text called the Master-Slave Dialectic by Hegel. In it, the oppressed has more knowledge of the oppressor than vice versa, because the oppressed is able to see things from this ground floor level that, the oppressor can't see. I felt like the slave in that scenario. The men and boys on these forums thought they were just engaged in some silly, fandom shipping war, and I was the only one that could see that on the other side of the screen wasn't a shipper or a fan. They were a channel of influence beating down on me, trying to clear away that which is essential to my interactions with art and stories. My anger as a woman, my love of other women, my desire that they should be allowed to express themselves naturally. I don't think cis men get it. The betrayal and anger and despair that is inherent to the experience of being a woman under patriarchy. You see a few scattered issues and you think you understand the weight of the summation of it all. Rape culture, income inequality, beauty standards. You get rid of all that and, all will be equal. But you're building dams to hold back creeks when a monsoon is beating down on us constantly. This trauma is so innate to who I am. It's a vital part of how I read text. Katara's final decision is not hers. So obviously can I see that it is not hers. It feels viscerally like an arranged marriage. And it's just so cruel. Because it's this girl who so accurately and deeply encapsulates how it feels to be a woman living under patriarchy, bent and manipulated by the silent predatory force of a couple of creepy middle-aged men who wanted to marry her off. Yeah, it is creepy. I know it must seem strange to some people to fixate this much on a single plot point of a show that ended 16 years ago, but what I want you to take away from this video is that things like harm and oppression and influence are so much more subtle in their effects than we tend to think. And the more privilege you have in one area, the less language you have with which to discuss the nuances of another's experience. Things like microaggressions don't just come from people. They come from art and stories and anything else our young minds are fed as they grow. A lot of people who watch Avatar don't even see this side of the material. They don't get how badly and personally it hurts. And the extent of the anti-Katang, anti-bryke, pro-Katara communities on Tumblr are a testament to the fact that I'm not the only one who picked up on this as a deeply harmful and long-lasting thing. My voice is, like, gone. Oh god. And I also want you to consider that next time you get into an argument and you want to disagree with someone's claims, maybe they are speaking with a level of authority that you just don't have. Not authority in the sense that their words should dominate overall, but maybe they have a level of expertise in a certain area because they've experienced it. And on a more grounded level, I just want you to love Katara as much as I do, because she is so much more than the men who made her. Thanks for watching.